Welcome to another episode of Rose Resource Room, where we discuss all things homeschooling. We're joined by Mr. Scott Woodruff from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, affectionately known as HSLDA, an organization with a mission to defend and protect parental rights so that children can direct their child's education. Mr. Woodruff, welcome to the show.
Ro, it is truly my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you so much. Can you give us a brief introduction of yourself?
Well, sure. I was introduced to homeschooling when I lived in Missouri, probably about 1995. We had bought or built a house near our church so our kids could walk to our church school. And one day my wife came home and said, Scott, we should try homeschooling. And I said, What? That's why we built this house here. That's a crazy idea. But I grudgingly let her do a pilot project over the summer. I figured that couldn't hurt my kids. I fully expected that I would come home and find her in tears, the kids screaming, dinner burnt, the house a wreck. I couldn't imagine how she could take care of normal household responsibilities and educate three little kids. Well, to my astonishment, the home was actually happier. And what I figured out is that homeschooling gives the home a mission. And the
Mm.
sense of mission draws people together. Think about the movie Apollo 13. They all drew together. They knew they were going to live together or die together. And that's kind of like what homeschooling is.
I like that. And I really appreciate your transparency in sharing that you were initially a reluctant homeschool parent, right? Because a lot of times we hear people who are like, before I had children, we just knew we wanted to homeschool. So for someone who feels the call of God and they don't feel that excitement, it's good to hear from someone like you who not only was a reluctant homeschool parent, but also has dedicated your life to defending other people's right to homeschool.
Right, definitely. It was kind of a slow dawn thing. And then once I actually was willing to open my mind to it, it's like, oh, wow, I can see how this totally fits in my faith walk. I can see how it totally fits, my service, my obedience to God.
Man. All right. So I definitely want us to talk about a lot of things related to New Jersey's legislation. But before we dive into the specifics, I'd first like to acknowledge Enoch, the education network of Christian homeschoolers. They have stood in the gap, ready and willing to fight for homeschool freedom in New Jersey. And I know they disbanded around 2020, perhaps after seeing a decline in interest and engagement. And I have deep appreciation for the work they did. So I just want to say thank you to Enoch and also educate anyone who's listening that a couple families banded together and said, hey, we want to make sure that our freedoms are preserved. So Enjoy Homeschool New Jersey was born. Enjoy is an acronym for Educating New Jersey's Outstanding Youth. And that's just a reminder too that, we need to enjoy it, not just survive it. Like you were saying, you were fully expecting her to be like, okay, you were right. I can't do this, right? But we need to enjoy it and realize it is a gift from God. So, Homeschool New Jersey, we are here and we're willing to fight for your needs. We want to make sure that we are working closely with you, Mr. Woodruff at HSLDA, to be the boots on the ground and contact legislators and keep everyone informed of the legislative issues. So, a big thank you to HSLDA for being the consistent force for so many years.
That's kind of you, Ro. Thank you.
My pleasure. So, turning over to the legislative side, June 2025 was a very important month for New Jersey. We saw a lot of bills come down the pipeline, and I will just introduce them and then ask you to elaborate on them. So, the first one, this was even before Homeschool New Jersey was incorporated as a 501c3, was Senate Bill 1796. And it was really a bill to require every homeschool family in New Jersey to file a letter with their public school superintendent expressing their interest to homeschool their children. And then they would provide the birth date and the grade level of each child. So we had concerns about privacy. Now, can you share your concerns about its current status and explain to someone who may think, what's the big deal? It's vanilla. Why is it a big deal?
So the big deal is really simple to explain. New Jersey already has a very muscular homeschool law. It requires that a parent provide instruction to a child equivalent to what the child would receive in public school. That's a big deal. That is a muscular, significant standard. The beauty of that standard is that it puts the emphasis where it should be on the education of the child. Once a state shifts over to emphasizing paperwork, then you set up a scenario where someone could get in trouble just for not filing a piece of paper, just being sloppy with paperwork. You forget, there's a flood or a storm, things get lost, your computer blows up, life goes crazy, you miss a deadline, and now you get a summons to go to court. And we all deep down know that that's not right. People
Mhm.
shouldn't go to court because they forgot a deadline if they're actually, doing the right thing for their kids. So why even set up this booby trap? Why create this minefield to trip good people up when they're doing a fine job educating their kids? And what are they going to do with all this paperwork? Collect it, make paper airplanes out of it? This bill would envision a piece of paper for every homeschool family every year until the end of time. Why? What's that all going to do? How is that going to help anyone? It's not. It's a typical classical example of absolutely pointless red tape.
So thankfully, we can say that the bill has paused. It's been withdrawn. I'm really thankful that Senator McKnight took the decision to pause it. What we were not expecting is that after we got home, we would hear about new bills being introduced. So Assembly Bill 5796 and its identical Senate Bill 4589. These bills call for every homeschool child and parent to meet annually with a school official for a general health and wellness check. So this could be a school counselor, a school nurse, a social worker, anyone designated by the superintendent. And that's an opportunity, as they say, to conduct a general health and wellness check. So move over pediatricians because the school superintendents are doing this now. What are your thoughts on what makes this bill so egregious?
Yeah, this is kind of crazy. First of all, there is no definition of a general health and wellness check. So, how do you create a law? Why do you create a law with a phrase that's undefined? So, and what are officials actually going to do? So, let's say a good-natured official who wants to obey the law says, "Oh, I have to do a health and wellness check on Scott Woodruff's kids. How shall I do this? Hmm, I don't know. I guess I'll just use my own imagination." So the official comes in and starts uh, getting my kids by themselves away from me, which very well could happen, and then starts interrogating them about all their health problems. You know, what about those pimples? What about your other issues? How about sexual health? What about behavioral health? What about have you ever tried drugs? And you can just imagine how humiliating this would be for children, how invasive, how incredibly, violative this would be. And yet there are no parameters on the bill about what the official can ask about. There is no parameter on how long this could take. Would this be a 30-second, how are you? Fine, goodbye? Or would this be a 2-hour interrogation? Would this involve one official, or would officials take turns? Would the school nurse do her interrogation and then call in a truant officer to ask some more? And finally, bring in the school social worker to ask her questions while the poor child sits there fidgeting nervously. It's
Right.
just absolutely ridiculous.
Well, you talked about how vague it is. And in that ambiguity, it made me start to think of home rule. And typically, that's not what I think of when I think of how something is written. But since New Jersey is a home rule state, what would that mean for us?
So, Rogue, I'm not familiar with how home rule works in New Jersey. Can you give me a quick thumbnail sketch of that?
So, my understanding, and I honestly don't know a lot about it, but my understanding is you just kind of make up what you want as a district. So that's what made me think of it in terms of in this state, this is how, I'm sorry, in this city, this is how we use our funding. In this district, this is how we make our rules. So it
All
makes
right.
me a little concerned based on what you were saying. Maybe this superintendent will say, well, this is how we do it here because there is no standard.
Right. Okay. I know what you're talking about. Other states have that same arrangement by, with a different name, but the principle is that the presumption is that every locality is totally autonomous from the state, and the only limits on a locality's authority is what is explicitly in state law. And if there's no state law limit, they can do essentially anything. But, newsflash, localities have to obey the U.S. Constitution. And under 14th Amendment jurisprudence, a law that is too vague is unconstitutional. In fact, one of the first big homeschool victories in America was when a very vague homeschool law in Missouri was struck down as unconstitutional. And a law is unconstitutional if it doesn't create reasonably clear parameters for what officials should do. So the state can't just say, officials, go out there, investigate, and use your best judgment. That's a
Hmm.
clear example of unconstitutionally vague law. And this one, I believe, would be vulnerable to that same criticism. It doesn't say what what a general health and welfare check consists of. It doesn't say what happens with the results. It doesn't say who gets this information. It doesn't say what questions can be asked. It doesn't say what to look for. It is, I mean, I would give you 95% chance. Um, I'm going to take that back. I'm always way too optimistic. I personally think it would be and should be struck down as unconstitutional. But let me hasten to add that getting a bill overturned on a constitutional ground is a long, arduous process and takes the investment of hundreds of hours of really laborious, high quality legal work. So I never want to talk frivolously about getting a statute overturned as unconstitutional.
Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so let's move on to Assembly Bill 5825. This is the bill that requires parents or guardians who intend to homeschool their child to submit an annual letter to the superintendent. So first, that's that notice of intent, just in different wording. We need to register as a home education program. The letter has to include the name and the age of the student, as well as the name of the supervisor of the home education program. So me, the mom. And in addition to that, we need to submit a copy of the curriculum that will be used. We need to make sure that we submit a portfolio with a written evaluation. And oh, by the way, the evaluation cannot be done by the parent. It must be done by a licensed psychologist or a certified teacher, administrator for the public school in the States. Um, and this evaluation is due by June 30th. Thoughts on that?
Well, I feel like I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole into Alice in Wonderland, where everything is topsy-turvy, and the faster you run, the behinder you get. Let's just kind of dissect this a little bit. Um, Public school systems take literally years to evaluate a potential new curriculum to see if it lines up with state standards. Years to evaluate one curriculum. So what's going to happen in August and September if this kooky bill is enacted when 3,000 homeschool families all submit slightly different curriculums and are told, oh, you can't homeschool until we approve your curriculum? Who is going to read them all and line them up with state standards? The logistics of that are just mind-boggling. And remember, they have to have approval or they can't homeschool. So the logistics are crazy. Now, you haven't gotten to the content yet. Do you want to mention that or shall I dive into that?
Go right ahead.
All right. So um, let me open this by saying that there is no state in the country that has ever created a law mandating the content of what families have to teach. There are states that mandate subjects,
Mhm.
and there are broad subjects, English, math, social studies, but this goes way beyond that to mandate that the actual New Jersey content standards be included in every homeschooler's curriculum. And let me give you a couple of those. Um, Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Public schools must do this. Highlight and promote diversity, including economic diversity, equity, inclusion, tolerance, and belonging in connection with gender and sexual orientation, and it must include the political, economic, and social contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. You've heard of climate change? Per state law, public schools must teach climate change. They must teach it in every grade, and it must be incorporated into every subject. That means if you teach math in your homeschool program and don't incorporate climate change, you're out. You just lost. You're cooked. What about the sheer number of subjects that are required for New Jersey public schools to teach? Now, I'm going to list the required items, and some of these I would want to teach in my program. Some you might want to teach. But these wouldn't just be options. These would all be mandated. So let's just go through these. Sexual assault prevention and education, dating violence, gang violence prevention, social media, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, consent for sexual activity, mental health, safe haven infant protection, ethnic contributions, grief, Lyme disease, breast self-examination, and Holocaust genocide. Now, my favorite there is Lyme disease because a lot of people in my neighborhood have had it, so I enjoy reading and studying about it. But do we need to micromanage homeschool parents at that level? So not only could their curriculum be kicked out if they have neglected to include grief as
Mhm.
part of their program, but, and you haven't mentioned this yet, Ro, but at the end of the year, yes, you did, sorry. The family has to turn in an evaluation, and it would have to cover every one of these subjects. So if you include grief in your program, but your evaluation doesn't cover your child's progress on that, you're out again. You're kicked out again. So this is like it's virtually impossible for anybody to comply every time. It's a nightmare.
I know. My heart and soul behind this conversation is education. I want the mom who was like, New Jersey is the best place to homeschool. There are no problems, who did not realize what was happening, to wake up and say, I need to fight for my freedom. I want the person who was apathetic thinking, it's just accountability. I want you to realize that it's oversight. And I'm even wondering if that's why Enoch eventually disbanded because they started to experience that kind of apathy where people are like, oh, I already know what to do. I don't need to do anything. I started homeschooling in 2022. And Enoch had already left by that time, but I had the privilege of all they fought for during the years that they were here. So I just want to remind people that it's easier to maintain what we have versus trying to acquire once it's been taken away. And a lot of these things, it may start off as, oh, I just want to do this, but the long game is what we're concerned about.
Right. So, every freedom that we enjoy is viewed with jealousy by someone with power above us.
Hmm.
Our freedom, I'm convinced, just annoys some people. And if certain people get the power leverage over us, they will strive to take that away, and they will think that they're doing humanity a favor in doing that.
Hmm. All right. So for the parent who's thinking, I'm just trying to teach my children. I'm not an advocate. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a freedom fighter. What encouragement or practical tips can you share in terms of getting involved?
So when my family first moved to Virginia in 1998, we rented a house while we were looking for a place to buy. Well, okay, I'm a self-confessed yard nut. You know, I like a good-looking lawn. It just makes me feel good and tingly all over. So my lawn in Missouri had no dandelions. Well, one day we came home in Virginia to our rental property, and my son, who was about 12 then, was aghast and said, "Dad, there are dandelions in our lawn." I calmly said, "No, son, there are dandelions in our landlord's lawn." So the point is, anything you feel like you own, you
Mhm.
take better care of. If you think it's someone else's, you might let the dandelions grow. To every homeschool mom and dad, I want to earnestly ask you, own your freedom. So when the threat comes, you won't say, "Oh, it's Rose's job to protect our freedom. Oh, Scott Woodruff will take care of it." I plead with you, say, "I own it." And when there's a request for action, do it. Tell your friends, tell your homeschool buddies, "Hey, there's a request for action. Please jump in." Take ownership of your freedom and help out when there's a need.
I love that. It's a very interesting year for New Jersey because it's a gubernatorial election year. So on November 4th, we will bring in either our Republican candidate, Jack Ciattarelli, or Democratic candidate, Mikey Sherrill. And I think it's really important to just remind people that civic engagement is not only at the federal level, it's not something you do every 4 years, but the state elections are extremely important and the local elections are important. Like, I think it was Tip who said all politics is local, right? So if you don't like your roads, you're not going to call the president. If you don't like the laws that govern your states, that's something that's really important for you to decide on who to vote in and who to elect. So I'm sharing that because I want to make sure that we're civically engaged in between election years. So you heard it, we have to own our freedom. One practical tip I would say is attend a meeting. This could be your council meeting. This could be any, maybe the library, they have meetings too, but like just start to get engaged. But specifically as it relates to homeschooling, I would say get to know your legislators.
Absolutely. That's crucial. That's excellent advice. Uh, Lawmakers tend to be people persons. In other words, lawmakers tend to like people. You don't get misanthropes and introverts, wanting to run for office because they have to make thousands of people happy. Introverts don't want to do that. People who hate humanity don't want to do that. So I can almost guarantee you that if you'll make an appointment and talk to your senator or assembly person, they'll be happy to see you. And if you go to meet them just to say, "Hey, how are you? I'm so and so. I live in your district. I'm not here to ask a favor. I just want to get to know you." They'll be delighted. And by that simple action, you've created a bridge. Then, when a legislative crisis does arise, you can say, "Hey, Senator, recall me? You met me and my family a month ago. Could I talk to you about a bill that I find very troubling?" Then you have a bridge by which you can communicate your objections to the bill. And because that senator already knows you personally, he or she will listen. And that's huge.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think sometimes we forget that we're the experts in our field. So if you're a homeschooling parent, you are the expert. We cannot expect that an elected official or a legislator understands everything from infrastructure to homeschool to sports to recreation to all the things. So they actually work for us, and we need to go to them and say, "Hey, I'm not sure what your intention is behind this bill. It may be well-meaning, but let me show you what that looks like for someone who's actually doing that." And also, it puts a face to a bill. So when someone is voting, it's not just this thing that looks good on paper, or it's not just this idea that someone threw out who has never walked a day in your shoe, but now it's, "Oh, the Woodruff family. Yeah, I know them. I met them. They spoke about XYZ. Yeah, Mr. Woodruff, he's, you know, a great guy." And now they can put a face and say, "No, I can't do that to them." Or it would be, "Hey, Mr. Woodruff, I'm thinking about ABC. What are your thoughts since you're in this world?" And I think that's the bridge that you're talking about in terms of now we can become that thought partner or that thought leader to say, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but no, thank you.
Right. And to kind of piggyback on that, if you're going to go and talk to your assemblyman or senator, you don't need to know all the answers. If he or she asks you a question and you don't know the answer, just say, "Let me get back to you on that." And then you can go back home, talk to
Mhm.
Ro or me or someone, and then get back to them with an answer. Nobody expects you to know everything. They really
That's right.
don't.
That's right. Beautiful. All right. So another question for you. Can you speak a little bit about how HSLD works with their state orgs?
Sure. We're a national organization. We're the nation's largest and oldest homeschool advocacy organization. Uh, in a sense, we're a law firm. We have 8 full-time attorneys who do nothing but work on homeschool legal issues 40 hours a week. I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than any other lawyer, but because we do nothing but homeschool law 40 hours a week, we have a huge reservoir of experience. And so someone who talks to an HSLDA lawyer is probably talking to just about the most qualified person they could talk to in terms of experience. So, for example, I've worked at HSLDA since 1998. I was HSLDA's attorney for New Jersey when the infamous Claghold guidelines were abolished. In fact, I sat on the task force that abolished those guidelines and brought peace to New Jersey. So we're a membership organization. You're welcome. Meaning that the biggest source of our revenue to operate comes from people being members. It's about $125 a year to join. Um, if you've ever priced lawyer fees, that would buy you about 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes of a lawyer time. But the beauty of the plan, where lots of people contribute a little, is that when any person needs a world-class defense, the money's there, people with the experience are there. And so you're not suddenly going to the guy who wrote your will and saying, "Hey, I'm being accused of truancy for homeschooling. Can you help me out?" You get kind of a deer in the headlights look. But you can go to someone who's been working on homeschool legal issues for years, or in my case, decades. And we have about 90,000 members nationwide. Um, but every year a few of them stop homeschooling, and we're always looking for new members to keep the organization robust, so our ministry can stay well resourced and vigorous and keep pursuing the expansion of freedom everywhere it's possible.
That is amazing. And then how do you work with the state organizations?
We partner with them. We don't do it all. We are we are an important resource for a state organization, and um, vice versa. We count on state organizations to do many important things, and they count on us to do many other important things. In the area of legislation, if I have an idea for a good bill, the first thing I do is call the state leader and say, "Hey, Joe, what about trying to change, say, South Dakota homeschool law to give homeschool parents a right to take the PSAT in public school?" And I'll talk to the state leader. And if we agree that's a good idea, we'll move forward. If they don't like that, we'll probably just set it aside. So we team up because homeschooling is most powerful when it's united. And we don't want to give anybody the impression that there is a division between
Mhm.
HSLDA and state organizations. We want to be unified. That's powerful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your insights and, just all the work that HSLDA does to protect homeschoolers. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I'll just toss this in. I turned 70 in August. In my opinion, old starts at 80. Um,
Okay.
my own homeschool kids have now grown up and they all have kids of their own. And my wife and I were blessed to adopt a little special needs girl. So even at my stage of ripe middle age, I have a 12-year-old girl at home, and it's awesome. So for you homeschool parents who are just really enjoying being a mom or dad, as your kids grow up, be open to the possibility of bringing in someone else to your home so you can continue to pass on the wonderful things that God and homeschooling has given you.
Amen. What a beautiful story of legacy and generational wealth in terms of just keeping it going. And I always love when parents finish and they look back and say, how can I help you? I needed something that I didn't have, but how can I be that resource to you? So thank you for doing that. And thank you so much for everything you do for the community.
It's my pleasure. I love to come to work every day, literally. I have not had one boring day at work ever since I came here. Every day literally every day, I get brand new challenges, and I just am amazingly blessed to have this awesome job.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, sir.